The shadows of the past. In the heart of Isioma village, life thrived under the vibrant hues of the African sky. The village bustled with activity, women pounding yam, men returning from the farms, and children chasing each other through the dusty paths amidst the hum of life. Emeka sat alone under the ancient baobab tree, a picture of quiet torment. The lively chatter of the village seemed like a distant echo, unable to reach him. At 27, Emeka was known for his charm and striking features, but those who looked deeper saw the storm within. His first love, Adis, had left scars that refused to heal. Theirs was a love story that began with youthful passion but ended in heartbreak and manipulation. Adis' beauty was matched only by her cunning, and her mastery of gaslighting turned every loving moment into a painful lesson. Emeka, you sit here as if the world has left you behind, Chak said, breaking his thoughts. He was Emeka's childhood friend, always quick with a joke, always ready to pull him out of his gloom. Emeka accepted the god of palm wine Chak offered. The world may as well have, he replied, forcing a smile. Chak raised an eyebrow. Still thinking about Adis? Emeka's silence spoke volumes. Chak sighed deeply. You must let her go. She's married now, Emeka. Her life is no longer tied to yours. But Emeka wasn't ready to let go. Adis' memory was a ghost that haunted his every relationship, a shadow that loomed over his happiness. The cause of unresolved love. Despite Chak's advice, Emeka remained trapped in the past. His heart was like a bird in a cage, longing for freedom but too accustomed to its confines. Every time he tried to love someone new, Adis' specter would rise, pulling him back into the darkness of their shared history. His relationships were brief and tumultuous. Ifunanya, a bright-eyed young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher, was the first to fall for Emeka's charm. She saw him as a man of depth, someone who had endured pain but was capable of great love. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank, Ifunanya looked up at Emeka and asked, "Do you love me?" Emeka hesitated, his mind a battlefield of emotions. "Of course, I do," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. They were distant, searching for something beyond Ifunanya. Ifunanya smiled, but deep down, she sensed that Emeka's heart was not entirely hers. She hoped that time would heal his wounds, that her love would be enough to draw him away from the shadows. But she was wrong. The web of deceit. Ifunanya was the first to bring life-altering news. One morning, she found Emeka near the village square, where he was helping the local carpenter. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Emeka," she began, her voice shaking. "I need to talk to you." Emeka wiped his hands and stepped aside. "What is it, Ifunanya?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Emeka's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. His first reaction wasn't joy or fear, it was panic. "Ifunanya, are you sure?" She nodded, tears now streaming down her face. "What do we do?" Emeka's mind raced. He knew the village would judge him, but more than that, he feared the responsibility. "Ifunanya," he said carefully, "this is not the right time for us. We are not ready." "What are you saying, Emeka?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "I think we should consider terminating the pregnancy," he said, barely able to meet her gaze. Ifunanya recoiled as if struck. "You can't mean that. This is our child." But Emeka's resolve was firm. Through promises of a better future and reassurances that it was the best decision for both of them, he wore her down. Ifunanya, against her better judgment, agreed. The same story unfolded with Amoka and Kolechi, two other women who fell victim to Emeka's charm and the cycle of fear, deceit, and manipulation he had mastered. Each time, he convinced them to terminate their pregnancies, leaving them emotionally shattered. The reckoning. One evening, Emeka returned home to find Kolechi waiting at his doorstep. Her once vibrant eyes were hollow, her shoulders slumped with the weight of grief. "Nkem," she began, using his affectionate name, "I've done what you asked, but I'm falling apart." Emeka looked away, shame tightening his throat. "Kelechi, I never wanted this for you, for any of us. Do you even know what you've done?" she cried, her voice rising. "I've lost everything, my peace, my career, my sense of self. You took that from me." Her words were daggers, each one piercing Emeka's soul. For the first time, he saw the full extent of the pain he had caused. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words felt hollow. "Sorry won't fix this," Kelechi said. "You've destroyed lives, Emeka. Including your own." Haunted by Addis. Emeka had always found solace in the quiet stream at the edge of the village. The soft rustling of the leaves, the gentle gurgle of water over smooth stones, and the distant calls of birds brought him a fleeting sense of peace. This was the place where he and Addis had spent countless afternoons, whispering dreams and making promises that would never be fulfilled. Even now, her memory was a heavy presence, an unyielding ghost that refused to be laid to rest. One day, as he sat lost in thought, a voice broke through his solitude. "Still brooding, Emeka?" He turned sharply. Addis stood there, her silhouette outlined by the golden glow of the setting sun. She was just as he remembered, graceful, poised, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Her presence was like a dagger twisting in old wounds. "Addis," he said, his voice barely audible. She stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. "You've made quite a mess of your life, haven't you?" Emeka clenched his fist. "Why are you here?" "To gloat. To remind me of the ruin you left behind." Addis laughed, a sound both sweet and cruel. "You give me too much credit. You were the one who couldn't let go, who allowed the past to consume you." Her words hit like a thunderclap. Emeka's chest tightened as memories flooded back, her subtle manipulations, her ability to twist every argument until he doubted his own sanity. He had loved her fiercely, and she had used that love to control him. "You poisoned me, Addis," he said, his voice shaking. "You turned love into a weapon, and I've been bleeding ever since." Addis' expression softened, but only slightly. "Perhaps. But at some point, you chose to hold on to the pain. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You clung to me, even when I was gone." Emeka stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. His obsession with her had been his downfall, a self-inflicted wound he had refused to heal. "You're right," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "But why did you come back now?" Addis smiled, a hint of sorrow in her eyes. "To tell you that it's time to let go. I've moved on, Emeka. It's time you did too." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Emeka alone by the stream. For the first time, he felt the chains of his past begin to loosen. The journey to redemption. The village elders decreed that Emeka must seek redemption, not only through words but through action. They tasked him with repairing the broken lives he had left in his wake. His journey began with Ifunanya, the first woman he had wronged. Ifunanya's home was modest, tucked away at the edge of the village. When Emeka arrived, he found her tending to her small garden. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as she saw him. "What do you want, Emeka?" she asked coldly. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I've wronged you, and I want to make things right." Ifunanya laughed bitterly. "Make things right? Can you undo the pain, the shame? Can you give me back the child I lost?" Emeka bowed his head. "I can't change the past, Ifunanya. But I can support you now, in whatever way you need." Her eyes softened, but the pain was still there. "You think it's that easy? That your guilt can heal the wounds you've caused?" "No," Emeka admitted. But I'm willing to try, if you let me. Over the weeks, Emeka helped Ifunanya rebuild her life. He worked tirelessly in her garden, repaired her home, and supported her as she resumed her studies. Slowly, her walls began to crumble, and she allowed herself to trust him again. The same process unfolded with Amoka and Kelechi. Each woman was a mountain of grief and anger, but Emeka climbed those mountains, determined to make amends. It was a painful journey, but with every step, he felt a small piece of his soul being mended. The final test. The elders, seeing Emeka's sincere efforts, decided it was time for the final test, a spiritual cleansing in the sacred forest. The forest was a place of both beauty and danger, a labyrinth of ancient trees and hidden trails. Emeka was to spend 7 days and nights in solitude, fasting and reflecting on his life. As he entered the forest, the air grew cooler, and the light dimmed beneath the canopy of leaves. The sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the whispers of the wind and the rustling of unseen creatures. Emeka found a small clearing and set up his modest camp. The first few days were a battle against hunger and fatigue. Without food or companionship, Emeka was left alone with his thoughts. Memories of his past mistakes played like a relentless reel in his mind. He saw the faces of the women he had hurt, heard their cries, and felt the weight of his guilt. On the 5th night, as he sat by the faint glow of his fire, Emeka fell into a deep trance. In his vision, he saw 3 children. They were radiant, their laughter like music. "Father," they said in unison, their voices filled with innocence and wisdom. "Who are you?" Emeka asked, his voice trembling. "We are the lives you could not keep," they said. "But we hold no anger, only hope. Your journey is not over, Father. You must learn to love again, not just others, but yourself." The vision faded, leaving Emeka in tears. He understood that forgiveness, both from others and himself, was the key to his redemption. A new dawn. When Emeka emerged from the forest on the 7th day, he was a changed man. The village gathered to witness his return, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. Elder Okeke approached him. "Emeka, what have you learned?" "I've learned that true redemption lies not in erasing the past but in facing it with courage and humility," Emeka said. "I cannot undo the pain I've caused, but I can choose to live differently moving forward." The elders nodded in approval. Over the next months, Emeka dedicated his life to helping others. He established a community center for young men, teaching them about responsibility, respect, and the importance of healthy relationships. He also continued to support Ifunanya, Amoka, and Kelechi, ensuring they had the resources to rebuild their lives. Slowly, the village's perception of him shifted. He was no longer seen as a man of disgrace but as a symbol of growth and redemption. Though Emeka carried the scars of his past, he found peace in knowing he was no longer defined by his mistakes. He had broken free from the chains of his former self, stepping into a new dawn with hope and purpose. The unseen mark. It had been 6 months since Emeka returned from the sacred forest, a journey that had stripped him to his core and pieced him back together. He worked tirelessly in the community center, helping young men understand the weight of their choices. His once haunted eyes now carried a glimmer of peace, though the shadows of his past lingered like ghosts in the corners of his mind. One quiet evening, as the village settled into its nighttime rhythm, Emeka sat on the porch of his modest home, enjoying the cool breeze. The air was filled with the distant hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. He sipped his palm wine, savoring the calm. But just as he began to relax, a distant sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the night's natural symphony. But as it grew louder, Emeka's chest tightened. It was the sound of drums. He stood abruptly, straining to hear. The rhythm was unlike anything he had heard before, slow, deliberate, and ominous. It wasn't the lively beat of a celebration or the ceremonial drumming that marked the changing seasons. This was darker, primal, as if the earth itself was beating its heart. Emeka hurried to Chike's house, his mind racing. When Chike opened the door, his face mirrored Emeka's anxiety. "You hear it too?" Emeka asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chike nodded, his expression grim. "The Reaper's drum," he said. "It's been decades since it last sounded. What does it mean?" Chike's gaze was heavy. "It means the spirits are restless. Justice is demanded, Emeka. And I fear it has to do with you." The drum's message. The next morning, the village square was abuzz with murmurs. The elders had convened an emergency council meeting, their faces stern as they awaited Emeka's arrival. He approached the circle of elders, his steps heavy with dread. "Emeka," Elder Okeke began, his voice resonant, "the Reaper's drum has called. It beats for the lives lost before their time." The gathered villagers gasped, their whispers a mixture of fear and intrigue. Elder Nana, the oldest among them, spoke next. "You must answer the call, Emeka. The Valley of Echoes awaits you. There, you will confront the spirits and seek their judgment." Emeka's throat went dry. The Valley of Echoes was a place shrouded in legend, a realm where the living and the dead met, where the bravest souls sought answers and returned changed, if they returned at all. "Why me?" Emeka asked, his voice trembling. Elder Okeke's gaze was unwavering. "You know why. The journey to the valley. The days leading up to his departure were a blur. The villagers avoided Emeka, their fear palpable. Ifunanya, Amoka, and Kolechi were the only ones who approached him, their faces marked with concern and something else, hope. "We'll pray for you," Ifunanya said softly, her hand briefly touching his. Emeka nodded, grateful but too consumed by the gravity of his task to respond. The night before his journey, Emeka visited the stream where he had often sought solace. The water shimmered under the moonlight, its gentle flow a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. As he knelt by the water's edge, he whispered a prayer, not for protection, but for strength to face whatever awaited him. At dawn, Emeka set out, carrying only a small bag of provisions and a staff carved with protective symbols. The path to the Valley of Echoes was treacherous, winding through dense forest and rocky terrain. The air grew colder the closer he got, the trees towering like silent sentinels. After hours of travel, Emeka reached the valley's edge. A dense fog blanketed the ground, and the air was heavy with an eerie stillness. The drumbeat was louder now, reverberating through the valley like a pulse. The spirit's judgment. As Emeka stepped into the valley, the fog seemed to part, revealing a vast expanse of jagged rocks and withered trees. At the center stood a colossal drum, its surface glistening as if alive. Before it stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence both commanding and terrifying. Emeka of Isioma, the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the valley. "You stand accused of disrupting the cycle of life. Do you acknowledge your sins?" Emeka's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. "I do," he said, his voice barely audible. "I have sought redemption, but I know I cannot undo what I have done." The figure raised an arm, and the air around Emeka grew colder. Suddenly, spectral forms emerged from the shadows, women holding infants, their eyes hollow and their expressions hauntingly sorrowful. They surrounded Emeka, their whispers merging into a cacophony of grief. "Why?" they asked, their voices filled with pain. Emeka wept, his tears falling onto the barren ground. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I let fear and selfishness guide my actions. I have no excuse, only regret." The cloaked figure's voice cut through the lament. "Regret is not enough. The spirits demand balance." The trial of shadows. The spectral forms began to move, circling Emeka. Each carried a shard of his past, moments of deceit, manipulation, and abandonment. He saw Ifunanya's tears, heard Amoka's cries, and felt Kolechi's despair. The pain was overwhelming, a tidal wave of guilt and sorrow. "You took from us," the spirits chanted. "Now, you must give." The figure raised its hand, and the drum began to beat faster, its rhythm matching Emeka's racing heart. "Two paths lie before you," it said. "One leads to eternal suffering, where your soul will serve as a warning to others. The other offers redemption, but it comes at a great cost." "What must I do?" Emeka asked, his voice breaking. The figure's eyes, now visible beneath its hood, glowed with an ethereal light. "You must forfeit your future. You will live a life of service, never knowing the love of a family. In return, the spirits will lift their curse, and the lives you've harmed will find peace." Emeka's heart ached at the thought. To never hold his own child, to live without the hope of a legacy, was he strong enough? "I accept," he said finally, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I will pay the price. The final atonement." The valley seemed to respond to his vow. The spectral forms began to fade, their expressions softening. The drum fell silent, and the cloaked figure lowered its arms. "You have chosen wisely," it said. "Your journey of redemption begins now. Serve well, Emeka of Isioma." The fog lifted, and the valley transformed. The once barren land was now lush and vibrant, a sign that balance had been restored. As Emeka made his way back to the village, he felt a strange sense of peace. His heart was heavy with the weight of his choice, but it also carried the seed of hope, a hope that his sacrifice would bring healing to those he had wronged. A new purpose. When Emeka returned to Isioma, the villagers gathered, their faces a mix of awe and reverence. The elders welcomed him back, and Elder Okeke placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have faced the spirits and returned. Your path will not be easy, but you have shown great courage." Over the following months, Emeka devoted himself entirely to the community. He expanded the community center, turning it into a sanctuary for those seeking guidance and support. He worked closely with Ifinanya, Amoka, and Kolechi, helping them rebuild their lives and find new purpose. Though he would never have children of his own, Emeka became a father figure to many, teaching them the values of accountability, respect, and compassion. His story became a powerful lesson, a reminder of the consequences of selfishness and the redemptive power of sacrifice. On quiet nights, as the village slept, Emeka would sometimes sit by the stream, listening to the faint echo of the reaper's drum. It no longer filled him with dread but with resolve, a reminder of the price he had paid and the lives he had vowed to protect.